When you think about a country, you usually think of about four things right away. Its name, of course, its flag, its location, and probably also its language. But oddly, some countries don't have a language of their own. They might have a dialect, sure, or their own version of another language, but why not a unique one? This is most visible across the Americas. The US and Canada speak English from England, as do many Caribbean nations along with French. Most of Central and South America speaks their own version of Spanish and Portuguese too. The whole continents were colonized by these four European superpowers at the time, so that is pretty normal. But when you go back to Europe, you also find some countries that don't have their own language. Let's find out why. First, let's list them. Which European countries don't have their own language? There's mainly four of them: Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, and Kosovo. If you include the microstates, you can expand that list to include Monaco, Liechtenstein, Andorra, San Marino, and the Vatican. Luxembourg is also a potential addition to this. Luxembourgish exists as an official separate language, but a lot of people argue that it's just a rebranded German dialect and de facto not an actual language of its own. I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think it is. An even more questionable one is a country like Ireland, where English is used widespread by 95% of people, but around 35 claim to be able to speak Irish. So they do have their own language, but they don't really use it. So now let's go through these, understanding what language they speak, if not their own, why they came to speak it, what differences there are between their way of using that language and the original one, if you will, and why there isn't, if there ever was, a different local national language. Let's start with Belgium. Belgium doesn't have a single national language unique to itself. Instead, it's divided between Dutch, French, and a super small German-speaking minority. The northern region of Flanders speaks Dutch, though locally it's called Flemish. I guess it's a dialect of Dutch too. Historically, the Low Countries were an area that encompassed most of the Benelux and some of West Germany. These were linguistically diverse, with dialects ranging from Brabantian to West Flemish, but as the modern state of Belgium emerged in 1830, French became the dominant language in administration, law, culture, and this kind of reflected the influence of the French-speaking elite. Dutch gained equality only in the 19th to 20th century, when linguistic activism forced recognition of a Flemish identity. Flemish differs from Standard Dutch, mostly in pronunciation, vocabulary, some idiomatic usage. It's not a separate language, but a cluster of dialects within the Dutch language family. In Wallonia, French is spoken, though with a slightly different accent and vocabulary, while in the east, about 1% of Belgians speak German in these small border towns that at one point belonged to Prussia, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. A distinct Belgian national language never developed because the territory was always split between two larger cultural spheres, the Dutch-speaking Low Countries and the French-speaking lands. Belgian identity was therefore political, not really linguistic, and its citizens continued to speak the languages of their larger neighbors. This is one of the reasons that many people still argue today that Belgium shouldn't exist as a country, either splitting into two sovereign nations of Flanders and Wallonia, or being partitioned between the Netherlands and France, and I guess Germany too, accordingly. Right next to it is Luxembourg, which, for the sake of the argument, I think we should include here. Luxembourg is interesting because it does have its own language, Luxembourgish, but this only became standardized and officially recognized in the 20th century. For centuries, the population spoke a Moselle Franconian dialect, very close to German. Meanwhile, French was the prestige language of law and administration, similar to Belgium, really, and it shows how the territory was competed over by the two neighboring powers as to who held the most influence over the centuries. Today, Luxembourg officially recognizes three languages: Luxembourgish, French, and German. Luxembourgish differs from Standard German in grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. It's influenced heavily by French. However, because of its small size and late codification, it's sometimes considered more of a dialect, elevated to the status of a national symbol, to build their national identity rather than being a fully independent language. Next, we have the most fascinating for me, Switzerland, because they use 4 national languages and 3 of them are foreign ones. They are German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Each of these corresponds to regions bordering the cultural spheres of their neighbors. German is spoken by about 2/3 of the population, French is spoken in the west, Italian in the south, and Romansh, a Romance language descended from Latin, by a really small minority in the canton of Graubünden. Historically, Switzerland was never linguistically unified. It was a confederation of Alpine communities lying at the crossroads of Germanic and Romance Europe. Because of their Alpine nature, they were very often separated from each other and kind of existed within their own separate little universes. The forms of German, French, and Italian used there are essentially the same as those spoken in the original countries, though Swiss usage often diverges in vocabulary, intonation, and even some administrative terms. For instance, Swiss German has unique words, and the spoken dialects are very different from standard German. But this is pretty common. Even inside Germany itself, you're going to find different unique words depending on the region that you are in. After all, Germany unified pretty late in history, so each region has their own cultural identity too, and that is reflected in the languages. Romansh is the only language unique to Switzerland, but it is a minority tongue, spoken by less than 1% of the population. It's not really the native language of the whole country. A national language distinct from the neighbors never emerged because Switzerland's identity was built on political unity and local autonomy, not on a cultural or linguistic homogeneity. Its cohesion comes from its federal system, which allows multiple languages to coexist, rather than being replaced by a single Swiss language. In reality, the usage of multiple languages, especially foreign ones, is a perfect example of Switzerland's concept of existence as a confederation. And right next to it, we have Austria. Austria's official language is German, but the variety spoken there is known as Austrian German. The reason they speak German is rooted in the medieval duchy's integration into the Holy Roman Empire, where German was the language of administration and culture. But of course you have the argument of a place like Bohemia, now Czechia, which was also part of the Holy Roman Empire and still had its own identity and language. The Habsburg dynasty, which made Vienna its capital, promoted German throughout its dominions, even as the empire encompassed many other languages. And I think this is the main reason why they still use German up to today. Austrian German differs from the German of Germany in several ways though. Pronunciation is softer, it's closer to Bavarian dialects, vocabulary includes many unique terms, often influenced by the monarchy's past ties to Hungary, Czechia, and Italy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, ruled by the Habsburgs. Everyday speech is dominated by dialects such as Viennese or Tyrolean, and so they differ within the country too. But still, the language is fully mutually intelligible with German from Germany. In sum, a unique Austrian language never arose because Austria's core territories were always part of the German-speaking world, and the Habsburgs used German as a unifying force in their multinational empire. They even had short periods of being reconnected to Germany proper throughout history. So Austria's distinctiveness lies more in culture and history than in language. Now, all of these situations have a bonus to us as people, which is if you learn one of these languages, then you'll be able to speak in a bunch of different countries. And which better way to learn any of these languages than with the help of today's sponsor, Lingopie. Lingopie really is the best way to learn a language. And with their huge catalog, you can learn up to 13 of them with one single membership, from French to Greek, South Korean, Chinese, Italian, and many more. The best part of it is the way through which you learn. Watching authentic movies and series directly from the culture of your target language. They have over 3,000 shows and movies available on their platform. If you want to access an even wider catalog, you can download their extension and then watch select shows on Netflix, Disney+, as long as you have an account there too. You get special subtitles that allow you to interact with what's being said and learn what it means, what context it's used in, and many other key details that you might miss out on with regular subtitles. It essentially turns every episode into a fun lesson with flashcards, quizzes, and real exercises. And it's not just an app on your phone, you can do it on your desktop, laptop, or even on your TV. Through the link in the description at learn.lingopie.com/gk, you can try it out for free for a whole week, so I would highly recommend it. But now, let's get back to the video. Sandwiched between our last two cases, we have Liechtenstein. Here the question shouldn't be so much why do they speak German, it should be why are they their own country, but anyway. Liechtenstein uses German as its sole official language. In everyday life, however, the population speaks different Alemannic dialects, particularly similar to those spoken in Switzerland and the bordering part of Austria. The country came to use German because it historically also lay within the Holy Roman Empire and was long ruled by German-speaking elites. The dialects have strong particularities. There are many expressions, words, and pronunciations that differ significantly from Standard German, to the point that Germans from the northern regions often struggle to understand people if they go and visit Liechtenstein. Yet because Standard German was codified again as the prestige language of education and literature, the dialects never gained official recognition as separate languages, like they did in Luxembourg. Liechtenstein never developed its own distinct language, because people were culturally and politically integrated into the broader German-speaking world. A separate linguistic identity was never really needed for their national survival. Next is Kosovo, and we can cue all the Serbians saying that Kosovo is a part of Serbia, but whether you like it or not, it is de facto its own country. And their linguistic situation is as intricate as its status. The majority population speaks Albanian, while a minority speaks Serbian, both of which are official languages. During Ottoman rule, Turkish was also widespread as an administrative and cultural language. The use of Albanian in Kosovo reflects centuries of settlement and demographic dominance, particularly in the 20th century as Albanians became the majority. Compared to standard Albanian, the Kosovo version shows a few regional differences, mainly belonging to the Geg variety, which is different from the Tosk dialect used in most of Albania. Kosovo never developed its own language because it was historically part of larger polities, first the Ottomans, then the Yugoslavs, then the Serbians, and its population was linguistically tied to either Albanian or Serbian cultural spheres. Moving into the microstates, Andorra is a really interesting case because it speaks a language that isn't its own, but it also doesn't belong to any other sovereign country. It speaks Catalan, and it's the only state in the world where Catalan is a sole national language. Catalonia is of course where it comes from, but despite the desire of many locals, it's not independent, and still only an autonomous region of Spain. Andorra historically belonged to the same cultural sphere as those counties of Catalonia, and adopted Catalan naturally as their main language. Over time, it became isolated in the mountains, and so its dialect of Catalan preserved some more archaic features that are no longer common in Barcelona speech, though today it remains mutually intelligible with it. The prevalence of Spanish and French people due to immigration somewhat reduced Catalan's dominance in daily life, but it is still protected by law. A uniquely Andorran language never developed because, in reality, it already had one, even if it came from somewhere else. And what about Monaco? Monaco's official language is French, and this is also the language spoken in administration, schools, most aspects of public life. The adoption of it reflects the principality's deep historical ties with France, particularly since the 19th century, when Monaco's sovereignty was guaranteed under French protection. It was some diplomatic deal where Monaco was allowed to remain sovereign in exchange for some privileges, and I think some land granted to the French. But they did have their own national language at some point. The older local tongue of Monaco was a Ligurian dialect called Monegasque, related to the dialects spoken along the Ligurian coast of Italy. Over the centuries, especially as French influence grew and immigration brought in more French speakers, Monegasque receded in everyday life. Today it survives as a cultural heritage language. It's taught in schools but spoken fluently by very few. Inside Italy, we have two other microstates that don't have their own language. Both of them speak Italian, and they are San Marino and the Vatican. San Marino uses Italian as its official and everyday language. The state is located entirely within Italy, and it's always been linguistically tied to the surrounding Romana region. Italian spread as the language of culture and administration during the Renaissance, and of course they naturally adopted it. Locally, Sammarinese people traditionally spoke a Romagnol dialect, but it has declined over time as Italy replaced it in formal and informal life. It speaks its own slightly unique dialect still, in the same way that any part of Italy does, really. While Vatican City is unique in that its official languages are functional rather than national. Italian is the working language of government and everyday communication, while Latin remains the formal language of the Catholic Church. It's used in liturgy and official documents, which I think makes it the only country in the world in which Latin is one of the official languages. Italian dominates though, because of course it lies in Rome, inside of Italy, and most of the clergy and staff are overwhelmingly Italian. Latin today is preserved only as a written and ceremonial language. There's no day-to-day use of it, really. Finally, since there's a de facto foreign language being used instead of the national one too, let's talk about Ireland. Ireland today primarily speaks English, a language imported through centuries of English rule. The native Irish language, part of the Celtic family, was once dominant across the island, but it began to decline after the Tudor conquest in the 16th century. English gained ground through what was essentially colonization, the penal laws, and later the Great Famine of the 19th century, which disproportionately struck Irish-speaking communities. To put it simply, poor people spoke more Irish than English, and poor people died more during the famine. By independence in 1922, Irish had already retreated to the western fringes in the Gaeltacht regions, while English was the dominant language of urban life, education, even politics of those that wanted independence. Irish is still an official language of the state, and revival movements have preserved it as a cultural mark. While around a third of the population says they know it, fewer than 2% of them speak it fluently on a daily basis. However, Irish English has distinctive pronunciation, syntax, and vocabulary, which is influenced by Gaelic, making it quite different from British English and presenting a little bit of a mix between the foreign language and the local one. So, those are some European countries that don't speak their own language, understanding why that is the case and how different their local version of that language is from the original one. We could go much further than this if we wanted. I mean, it's kind of up to you where to draw the line. We could, for instance, group all the West Slavic languages into one, or the East Slavic languages into one. You could argue that Portuguese and Spain are close enough to be considered the same language, but I guess it's really somewhat up to our interpretation to decide what is a language, what is a dialect, and what isn't. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to my patrons for their direct support over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel as well over there, I would really appreciate it. If not, that's totally fine. I will see you next time here for more general knowledge.